Hello to everybody. Good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this ISWA webinar on the topic of hazardous waste perspective from Asia. This webinar has been organized by ISWA, of course, and with three national members of ISWA from Malaysia, Singapore, and Mongolia. So for those who, yes, this is it. And for those who don't know yet, ISWA is the world's leading network promoting professional and sustainable waste and resource management. ISWA is present in 110 countries and has more than 1,300 members. I think that for those who don't know ISWA, you can just go to the ISWA website and you will have all the information you need. I think that now you have here just few information about what ISWA is doing and what are the different events that we are promoting. And if you want to get to be a new member of ISWA, you just have to send an email to Daniel Purchase. His email address is there, and you will have all the information needed to be a member of ISWA. I have to say that for me, it's a really important organization with a lot of knowledge and a lot of exchanges between different members and different parties. So I think that if you are not a member, you should become. Just for me to introduce the different speakers apart from me. So we will have on the stage Shea Asma from who is director of Senviro in Malaysia, Matt Stanlos, who is director West Business Line in Veolia Singapore, and Belgam Bayara, who is manager in Mongolian Recycling Association. Yes, so thank you for all the speakers to be ready in a few minutes to be presenting and sharing your experience on the hazardous waste management in Asia and in your country. But just before that, I think I will say few words. Thank you. So you are all here. Okay. I will say a few words about hazardous waste management, and I will start by presenting myself probably. So my name is Nicolas Humez. I fell into the hazardous waste sector a long time ago when I was PhD, so something like 27 years ago. I've been working for SARP Industry, it's a subsidiary of Veolia, for the management of hazardous waste in continental Europe since 20 years now. And I'm in charge of public affairs today after having worked in research and development and managed different business units. So I'm the chair of the Hazardous Waste Working Group of ISWA. This is why I'm making this introduction. And I hope some of you will like to participate in our group more closely. I know that it's not obvious, but the COVID-19 outbreak forced us to better use remote meetings. So now it works perfectly. So for those who want to join us in the working group, I think it's time to come and share your experience with us. So I would like to draw up the big picture of hazardous waste management sector. Just have a look back at the origin and then look ahead. Industrial activities as we know today are quite old, with a very beginning at the mid or end of the 18th century. But the hazardous waste treatment activities, which development is mainly linked to industries, is quite recent and finds its origin at the time where pollution of the environment became a public concern with first political echoes in the beginning of the 70s, and I mean the 1970. Everything starts with a framework legislation and obligation made to industry to stop discharge polluted wastewater to water bodies and to have dedicated treatments for their most dangerous waste. So 50 years ago, the main objective was to take care of acute pollution for water bodies and water tables, and also to take care about occupational safety. So I present here a picture of my company in 1976 with the first kiln in our historical site in France near Paris. Yes, at that time, it was considered a huge and expensive constraint for most of the industries. But curiously, we can say today that it did not lead to a loss of competitiveness, but on the contrary, to the safe development of industry. Our sector takes the waste risk for them, and they like it, in fact. It's not the core business of industry, and they need to be sure that the job is done properly and safely. We have now very complex and integrated facilities where we can offer a broad range of treatments, but I will let my colleagues explain more in details what's happening on the ground. So from there, if I look ahead now, and even if we continue to provide the right service to deal with acute pollution, our role is changing. The shift towards circular economy and I would say always less or even zero pollution ambition pull us in another dimension. Indeed, we also have to take into consideration and find solutions for chronic pollution generated by industries and supported by our consumerist society. The picture I show you here is the same site as the one you've seen before. So always my company and the site we have in the harbor near Paris, but it's in 2020. So you can see that a lot of things have changed, and we have now a lot of different kind of treatment facilities on the same site, integrated site, that can deal with all kind of demand from the industry. So coming back to what's happened now, we have to think about not only pollution as on the past, but also the impact on health, on resource depletion, on biodiversity loss, and on climate change. And honestly, it's not very obvious to place the cursor at the right place. What is the best trade-off? Often, when you push on one lever, you degrade another one. So trying to recover or reclaim maximum resources, yet extracting and destroying all unwanted contaminants, and mainly what we call substances of concern, is much more difficult than recycling everything without taking care of these contaminants, and finally diluting everything in the material loop. Thus, our future consists in making our facilities evolving with this new zero pollution ambition, in innovating and developing new routes for circularity, for instance, in a battery for electric vehicles or for plastic decontamination, but always keeping in mind that we should recycle better and not only thinking about recycling more. This implies also to better know, identify, and trace not only the hazardous waste, but also molecules like substances of concern present in the waste. And the development of new tools for that is also necessary and is a big challenge for the different actors of the value chains until the waste operators. Our essential role has been emphasized at the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak with the lockdown, we all experiment in our countries. And I have to say that tomorrow we will start a new lockdown in my country, in France. Keeping the vital industries operating, like pharmaceutical industry or chemical industry, implied also keeping our facility open and in full operation. It was not obvious in terms of human resources management. It was not obvious in terms of supply needs, like ensure that we will have all the reagent we need for the treatment of the different kind of hazardous waste. And it was also very difficult in terms of having sufficient personal protection equipments. But finally, we succeeded, and we stood up where some of our competitors who are not 100% dedicated to treatment of hazardous waste stopped their activities. I think we demonstrated how robust and reliable we are all over the world. We are always there in this difficult time, and we answer yes to the coming challenges circular economy and climate change are posing to the society. So now we will start the panel discussion, and I would like to call on the floor the different speakers, our three speakers, just for a very small introduction for all of them. So if I can start by Chair Hazma, if you can come on the floor and present yourself in 2 or 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm Asma Ibrahim. I'm one of the director for Sembaro Sdn Bhd. I'm actually a retired civil servant. I work with Department of Environment for 28 years. And my last position is as Director of Hazardous Substances Division with Department of Environment Malaysia. I've left service since 2014, and after that, I was invited to join on Sembaro board, and I also work in several areas on green technology and low carbon development.
Okay, thank you very much. May I ask to Matt now to come on the floor and present itself?
Hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. Matt Sanalos from Veolia in Singapore. So I am director of our waste business line, which includes a brand new best practice hazardous waste installation that we're currently testing and commissioning in the market here. And I've been with the Veolia group for about 18 years, the last 5 of which have been here in Singapore. Look forward to a discussion with my colleagues on a hot topic.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Matt. Belgan now, if I may. Hello.
Hello everyone. My name is Belgan. I'm from Mongolia. I'm a manager of Mongolian National Recycling Association, and I have been working in waste sector since 2017. And our association has over 30 recycling industries, and 5 industries are for hazardous waste. I will more introduce our hazardous waste industries later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think now we will start the panel discussion. So we will have 45 minutes discussion with our 3 speakers with some questions that have been prepared. And in order to be more efficient, I will give an order, and we will keep this order for the different questions. So we will start by Shea, Asma, and then Belgan, and then Matt in this order to answer the different questions. And so we can start now with the first question for you 3 guys. What consideration are you taking in your respective countries when managing hazardous waste plants? And is there any specific regulation that are in place for that? So may I ask to Asma to start?
Okay, hello again. Yes, Thank you for the question. In the economic development of Malaysia, I need to bring back a bit of history on how we come about to establishing our procedures on hazardous waste management. Yeah, when Malaysia has decided to shift focus from agriculture to industrial manufacturing back in the late 70s and 80s, actually we know that we have to prepare we have to be prepared to manage the industrial waste, because economic growth has come with some burden to the environment, and one of the consequences of such development is in the increasing generation of industrial waste and effluent containing toxic and hazardous from industrial waste as well as just. So to balance that, actually Malaysia has enacted the Environmental Quality Act, Environmental Quality Act as the main piece of legislation that was administered by the Department of Environment to manage the whole environmental issues related to industrial development. And hazardous waste management was regulated under this piece of act. In Malaysia, hazardous waste was described as scheduled waste, which is prescribed under the regulation. We are categorizing our scheduled waste based on the level of potential hazard, and currently we have 77 categories of waste being prescribed under the schedule and the scheduled waste regulation, which has came into force since 1989. The legislation actually describes waste management processes from generation, storage, handling, recovery, treatment, and final disposal. Even transboundary movement of hazardous waste are also legislated in line with the aspiration of Basel Convention, which Malaysia has actually become a party to the convention since October 1993. So Malaysia upholds the cradle-to-grave principle in the hazardous waste management, but as technology progresses, the government are reviewing the current legislation to incorporate new approaches, which includes extended producer responsibilities and the like, to achieve cradle-to-cradle concept. So with that piece of national legislation in place, the government next need to come up with a facility that can treat and handle final disposal of hazardous waste generated in the country. Various steps were then taken. Waste survey were carried out in 1989. Concept, design, and financial feasibility study of the facility were done between 1989 to 1990. Site selections and EIA studies were done. And finally, national tender for companies who can carry out the facility has been opened. So finally, in 1991, a company by the name of Quality Alam was incorporated, and Quality Alam is entrusted by the government to provide an off-site facility for treatment and disposal of scheduled waste from cradle to grave, and was launched by our Prime Minister then, Tun Mahathir Mohamad, in 1998. So the existence of this facility is seen to support the industrial development for the growth of industrialization for the whole country. So Quality Alam is the Malaysian first integrated waste management center and be among the largest in the region at that time, and now is gazetted as national critical asset. And currently we are also constructing the second satellite facility in Johor. So our latest development is that we now have we are currently operate the only scheduled waste to energy plant in our center. We hold 79. We hold license to handle 79 category of out of 77 scheduled waste under the scheduled waste regulation, and we are actually considered a critical component in decision making for local and foreign companies in manufacturing industry to invest and operate in Malaysia. It is a long journey that we have come through today, and this is an example where the government and the private sector can work together to work in achieving the aspiration of the national building. I think I should stop there for now.
Okay, thank you very much. It's impressive what happened at the moment in Malaysia, so it's good. Thank you very much. We will continue with Belgium now. Yes. Belgium, it's your turn. Belgium, you are muted. We can't hear you. It's better. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. In Mongolia, four hazardous waste recycling industries are operating now, namely such as Acute Trade LLC is a licensed company and established in 1996, and that company has licensed to import 800 types of chemical substances, and has in that company recycled that types of chemicals in properly. And next company is to make sure is has only operated and licensed company recently, and that company is recycle hazardous waste package and bottles of plastic materials, and the heavy oil joint company. That company is recycle obsolete oils, and last company is NCC's company. It's that company is recycling materials are from mining industries. And for the regulations, Mongolia has joined international agreements and conventions like Minamata Convention on Mercury and Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, and Rotterdam Conventions on the Conventions and Basel Conventions. And we have in 2017, Mongolia has approved the law on waste. In this law, hazardous waste regulations are included, and in 2018, 18 regulation on transportation and collection, temporary storage, treatment, disposal, and export of hazardous waste, and licensing procedure to entities have been approved. And hazardous waste list in Mongolia has also released by government, and regulation has fairly implemented effectively.
Okay, thank you very much. So things are also moving, we see in Mongolia. And now I will let the floor to Matt for Singapore. Hello, Matt.
Thanks, Nicolas. So yes, here in Singapore, we have a relatively mature hazardous waste regulatory framework built upon the Environmental Public Health Toxic Industrial Waste Regs, which were released in 1988, and they're administered by the National Environment Agency's Pollution Control Department. So much like the structure in Malaysia, they cover all details of generating, transporting, recycling, treating or disposing of toxic industrial waste, which is the term that broadly covers all hazardous wastes in Singapore. There are certain specific requirements for some activities like incineration or management of special wastes like biohazardous wastes or asbestos. And in particular, in a place like Singapore, which is a port, there's also specific requirements for oil slops and other MARPOL wastes generated from marine activities as some examples of specific regulations. Also, Singapore has a large integrated industrial complex, particularly on Jurong Island, where there's been significant investment from many multinational companies and some local companies on industrial ecology and circular economy activity within the complex. So waste from one plant become sources of energy or resource from other plants for industrial processes or for utilities within the island or within the complex. And then there's several merchant plants providing toxic industrial waste services, either as an integrated approach across many types of treatment or specialist niches that are focused on certain demands, like there's a significant semiconductor industry in Singapore, and therefore there are certain wastes that arise from that electronics production that require metals recovery or some sort of acid treatment or the like, because they're very specific, where there are niche players that are dedicated to certain technologies. In terms of specifics for Singapore, I guess there are two key driving forces. One is that Singapore is not very big, 40 kilometres by 30 kilometres. There's not a lot of land, and so everything is constrained in size. All the industrial plants, including the hazardous waste facilities, are on small footprints. They're built upwards, not outwards. I would very much like to have the land available that Nicolas showed in his photo at the beginning at Humez. But that's not the case for anybody in Singapore. It also means that there's not a lot of space for landfill. There is one landfill for residual wastes, which is an offshore island complex that's accessed by barge. And so while everybody is focused on avoiding disposal to landfill anywhere in the world largely, the situation in Singapore is particularly constrained. And so we put as little on the barge as we can. And there's a focus on maintaining the available lifespan of that landfill for as long as possible. And the other key element is that there's quite a well-developed water network in Singapore, and wastewaters that are discharged to sewer from large parts of the mainland of Singapore. There are a couple of offshore islands that have their own system, but the mainland of Singapore, the trade effluent flows to new water recycling plants that are run by the Public Utility Board, and they create an industrial reusable water that's supplied back to industry for high water demand industries for use in industrial production. And what that means is that the recycling process on those waters and the feed limits that are required to enable that industrial reuse of the water drive strict limits on what can be discharged to sewer, which conversely pushes potential contaminants into the hazardous waste market as things that must be treated separately and not discharged to that water recycling network. The hazardous waste facilities, of course, are also restricted by these same discharge limits. So it means the technologies and processes applied at the hazardous waste facilities need to manage to enable an eventual residual of what is liquid discharge to meet those limits, because they flow to the same recycling plants. So that's a general summary of the situation in Singapore, and perhaps a couple of the elements that are unique to us.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm very sensitive to what you said on wastewater and what's happened in sewage and sewer. So thank you very much. We will go to the next question, which is, what step are you taking within your waste system to deal with issues related to contamination? So, and I will let the floor to Shea Hasma on this question first.
Okay, thank you again, Nicolas. Actually, contamination happens in many ways. It can be water contamination, land contamination, and of course, the air pollution is look at it differently. But in Malaysia, most of the happens related to hazardous waste disposal, illegal disposal of hazardous waste. Although I mentioned just now that we have a cradle-to-cradle approach of waste management, but of course there are still people who violate it, and somehow they need to be punished under the legislation.
I think we lose Shehasma. We have to continue and come back to Shehasma later with Bergen. Yes.
Hello again.
Yeah.
For the second question, I would like to share some data of Mongolia, and in 2014, we have estimated the hazardous waste. As a result of the estimation, 369 tons and 69,000 liters of updated obsolete chemicals are stored in 297 economic entities in Ulaanbaatar capital city and 21 provinces and other 139 zones. Actually, in Mongolia, hazardous waste recycling industries are not recycle all the contaminations, all the outdated chemicals, much liters and tons of chemical substances are stored improperly. For example, 55 of these chemicals are stored in the workplace, and 25% in improper storage, and 2.6% are in open areas. So, from government has a decision to temporary decision to store their chemical substances temporarily until establish new facilities in Mongolia. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Shehasma is with us again, so we will continue. I think we lost you somewhere in the middle of what you were saying. So if you can come back a little bit on your answer.
Okay, I'm not sure where I got cut off just now. But what I say is that there are actually, although we have a comprehensive legislation in the country, but those steps for preventing contamination through illegal dumping are there, but there are still cases of illegal dumping happening in the country, where then those who are that is where the authority will then carry out investigation, and they will be put to charge in court, and there are severe penalties that they have to pay. I don't know where I got lost just now, really.
No, I think that it's. I think that it's good. You came back on the right issue at the right time, I think. So it's okay.
Thank you.
I think now we will go to Matt. Matt?
Sure. Okay. So on the topic of contamination, yes, as the previous speakers mentioned, it's quite a broad topic, and there's many types of contamination. Here in Singapore, I guess at a regulatory level, the Act or the regulations that I mentioned before cover the tracking of of hazardous wastes and contaminated soils and whatever else that might be collected, transported, and treated. And then at a individual business level, we have to have our own system in place for managing the risk. So the NEA system is more about tracking the total volumes of movements and making sure people are compliant within the system. But at a risk level, the operator then needs to also have a thorough process for declaration of risks embodied in the waste between the customer and the service provider, and then have a pre-acceptance and post-acceptance screening process for assessing the waste and for making sure that batches of waste that are received over time are compatible and are in line with what was assessed pre-acceptance, to make sure that they can go to the right treatment line within the integrated complex and that the risks are managed appropriately. So it really means an ongoing dialogue with the customer, because there will always be variability in waste. There'll always be changes over time, and there'll be potential contamination or secondary hazards from whatever is declared in the customer's process. And obviously over time, the customer will have variability in their production and in what they're doing, or they'll have cleaning cycles or whatever they have. That means that those contamination risks need to be managed over time. And obviously, in addition to having a process and a good lab with a pre-acceptance process, we also have to have best practice treatment technologies to make sure that the materials that need to be appropriately destroyed, that the flue gas treatment is appropriate for the air emissions at the back end, and for the other processes that we need to apply for wastewaters and other materials that were appropriately constraining or destroying the risk. So that's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you very much. So obligations in terms of traceability, knowledge, and also from the other speakers, sanction is also something we should have in the legislation for sure. We will go to the next question, which is following from the previous question. Do you have specific, we come back on that, specific penalties, laws for the mishandling of hazardous waste? A very important question, I think. So, Shehasma, please.
Yes, as I mentioned just now, it is the responsibility of waste generator to make sure that their waste are managed and disposed in a safe manner. So every movement of the waste and the chain of custody in handling the waste need to be tracked, and they are fully responsible until for the waste from its generation till it reaches its final disposal. For that is where we say from cradle to grave. Okay, in Malaysia, we have a heavy penalty for this. If the case were brought to court, they will be subject for heavy fines up to maximum $500,000 ringgit. And it's mandatory jail. So it is fine and mandatory jail. It's not all. So even one day you will have to go to jail. And also they will be made responsible to do the cleanup and bear all the cost. So during my time with the department, actually I have executed this clause under the regulation, and well, I can say that I've sent few people to jail even for one day. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very clear. So now from Belgan in Mongolia.
Okay. By regulations, waste generators have to pay a company who collect and handle and disposal operations. And if that waste generator has don't provide any hazardous waste to a company, that the generator's special license will be cancelled by government. And if hazardous waste generators don't obey the law, other laws are regulated. For example, waste law on waste and other conflict law, regulated by conflict law and waste law.
Okay, thank you very much. It's clear. And now from the Singapore perspective.
So yes, here in Singapore, there are penalties for breach of the regulations, both on occurrence basis and continuing penalties for delay over time for additional days of continued breach. But to be honest, the costs of the regulatory penalties are pale into insignificance compared to the cost of managing the waste that needs to be dealt with, and also with managing the recovery from a loss of control. So the cost to repair or reinstate a facility and to deal with any impacts, particularly if there's harm to people involved, would be substantially more than the regulatory penalties. But the combination is certainly expensive, which means that you need to be on top of it to make sure that you don't incur these costs.
Okay, very clear. So we will go to the next question, which is this one. Are there any particular technologies or trends in emerging technology that you find promising for the sector? I think everything will turn around potentially recycling or these kind of things. And we will start with Malaysia.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, the various technology that we have in managing hazardous waste varies according to categories. We have waste recovery or recycling facility that actually recover and reuse materials. So that is that requires a specific type of technology. And then we also have treatment facility, which is mainly mainly for materials that require changes in the physical and chemical character before disposal, so that uses thermal, physical, biological and chemical method to reduce potential harm in the waste before it's been disposed. And the other category is on land disposal facility, that is the final destination for stabilization of waste that need no further use and being permanently buried below the soil surface. So for fully integrated facility like what Quality Alam, that is a subsidiary of Sembaro, is having, mainly we have incineration plant, we have a solidification treatment plant, we have physical chemical treatment plant, and finally the secure landfill. And we also have clinical waste treatment facility there. So that is why it's integrated it's called integrated in that manner. And as I said just now, that we are also running the only one scheduled waste to energy incineration. So with regards to technology, it varies. I think we know that technology are expensive, so we really need to get to the right technology that fulfill our needs. And in Quality Alam, we have, of course, incineration is the heart of the whole process, and our waste to energy plant has a capacity of treating 33,000 metric ton per year of waste and generate 3.4 megawatt of electricity, which is equivalent to powering 9,500 homes. And also we have innovated our landfill to go for vertical secure landfill. Basically, help to extend the lifespan of the landfill, which will cater for a longer lifespan for the final disposal of toxic and hazardous waste. I think here I also should have mentioned earlier that in Malaysia, the regulation that controls hazardous waste are separated from regulations that are controlling solid waste. So when we say integrated facility, it means that the whole treatment components are there in as integrated in one place. It's not that we are integrating facility of solid waste and hazardous waste together. That's what we have in Malaysia. And of course, the recovery facility has come in with many forms and many kind of technology. And this is where the authority needs to evaluate every time the new technology comes into the market, whether it is able to meet the requirement and the standard prescribed by the legislation.
Okay, thank you very much. It's clear. I have to say that I've seen the vertical landfill in
Yeah.
and it's very impressive.
Yeah, thank you.
So Belgium now.
Before I mentioned, over 30 waste industries are operating in Mongolia, and the technology and technologies are very different. But the main and most companies' technologies are outdated, and output and outcome is relatively less. So in hazardous waste disposal, for companies, from that for companies, two companies are facilitated very well, and international standard meet the international standard, and so. But that companies, hazardous waste companies, are invested domestically, and we need to expand the facilities. Actually, yes.
So I was on mute. So I was just saying to you what is for you new technologies and innovation.
Okay, so here in Singapore, there's quite a diverse range of market sectors generating waste, which usually drives the direction of innovation because it depends what is required for treatment. So, I mean, those sectors in Singapore include oil and gas, specialty chemicals, electronics, pharmaceutical, and perhaps before COVID to a greater extent than today in aeronautical as well as the marine sectors arising from the port activity that I mentioned. So there are a number of technologies already in place, and some of them quite leading edge in terms of dedicated installations within the manufacturing complex and some centralised facilities on Jurong Island in particular for resource recovery and energy recovery and treatment. I think the future for Singapore for technologies will follow that path of circular economy that Nicolas mentioned and that I also mentioned before, to improve either resource or energy recovery, to return some chemicals that might be in the waste stream or wastewater streams back into production processes, to have further multi-utility infrastructure where there's different types of energy capture, including things like solar and whatever else into processes to try and maximise the sustainability of the facilities. But there'll always be an ongoing balance between what can be done on site within the industrial premises and what needs to be off site at the merchant integrated plants. Perhaps the main trend will be that the wastewater discharge requirements to sewer become increasingly stringent. They will continue to be so, and that means there needs to be improvement in standards at the plants that are either upgrading or that become, like our plant was a new greenfields installation. So that means that there's the new elements to process safety, new elements to fire safety, new elements to waste acceptance processes and management of flow of material before it comes to the plant and then once it comes to the plant. And obviously things to do with emissions treatment and those kind of things that post-treatment requirements that are always continually improving. That's about it.
Okay, crystal clear. Thank you very much. So we will go now to the next question, which is, what implications do you foresee for your countries from amending or revising the annexes of the Basel Convention, which is a hot topic at the moment, really? So, Asma?
Okay, thank you. Well, in compliance with the Basel Convention on Control of Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste, Malaysia has taken steps to amend our law to control import and export orders that is formulated under the Malaysian Custom Act 1967, where it prohibits importation or exportation of hazardous waste unless it's done with prior written approval from the Director General of Environment. So this orders has been amended and already took effect in terms of its enforcement. So Malaysia has always adhere to the principle of to the principle and basic obligation of Basel. Okay, I hope I'm not out again because I'm having problems.
It's fine. It's fine.
All right. Okay. So therefore, Malaysia has come up with the following policies with regards to Basel Convention. Malaysia believes that we has the sovereign right to prohibit hazardous waste to be imported into our country for final disposal purposes. And Malaysia restricts the importation of hazardous waste into our country. Licensed recovery facility shall manage and process hazardous waste generated and collected in country only. Malaysia also allow the importation of hazardous waste only for purpose of direct reuse or as alternative raw material, provided that hazardous waste is not available in the country. Malaysia prohibits the exportation of hazardous waste for the purpose of final disposal as well. And Malaysia allow exportation of hazardous waste subject to the following conditions: where the importing country has better technology, which result in higher recovery rate than technology available in Malaysia, where no technical capability and necessary facility to recover the waste in environmentally sound manner. So we are, okay, I'm still on, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Malaysia does not allow hazardous waste to be imported from parties and other states which are not member of OECD, EU and Liechtenstein under Band Amendment, which we have actually ratified that. And movement of hazardous waste between party and non-party is only permitted if there is a bilateral or multilateral agreement exists between the two states involved. And shipment of hazardous waste must be packed, labeled and transport in conformity with accepted and recognized international rules and standards. And Malaysia allow transboundary movement of used electronic for the purpose of direct reuse and repair under warranty only. So those are the basic principle and policies upheld by Malaysia. And with the current amendment on Basel, which involve mainly the plastic waste and the electronic waste, the same principle still upholds.
Okay, very clear, very clear. Thank you very much. And what is for Mongolia?
Mongolia has joined the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste and the Disposal in 1996. But we haven't had any information how that responsibilities of Mongolia imposed by convention is unclear to public. So we cannot give any suggestions or revising the annexes at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Clear. Matt?
Okay, so for Singapore, the hazardous waste market is largely internally focused. So obviously there's some exception to that with the waste generated from marine activities and ships coming to port, but largely the import of hazardous waste is restricted. There is an approval process with the Director General of the NEA, but it's extremely limited. So the main impact of any amendments to Basel Convention are around export rather than around import. And that's is predominantly in the new or non-traditional hazardous wastes that are coming in when we're talking about the difference between waste and used electronic equipment, because there's some trade in used electronic equipment into neighbouring countries, and plastics, the same as Yasmin mentioned in relation to Malaysia, and a few items like that. Generally, other than a few specific wastes that go to dedicated facilities elsewhere in the world, there's a limited amount of export, and everything is processed in Singapore. From a business model perspective, I mean, I think there's always some changing of the global landscape when Basel changes, and particularly for some of these things related to plastics, when Singapore has a large specialty chemical and plastic precursor production market that will impact the market more generally and make the larger players think about what is generated and how it will be managed into the future.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will go now to the last prepared question, I would say, before having a Q&A session with some of the questions that have been asked by the participants on the question box. So this question is very long and concern an issue that is very predominant at the moment regarding COVID-19. In the systems you manage or are responsible for, what changes in volume or services have you seen due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic? This will answer to some of the questions on the box. How easy or hard has it been to continue to provide services to manage hazardous waste? And last question, are we ready to handle the volume of medical healthcare waste that the pandemic is generating? So, Che Hazma.
Okay, thank you. For your information, at the Quality Alam facility, we do handle clinical waste or medical waste as well. Apart from Quality Alam, there are also several facilities licensed by the authority to manage clinical waste. They are just specifically handling clinical waste, but for our case, we handle clinical waste as part of other hazardous waste as well. So during COVID, we see there's not much difference in terms of the volume of medical waste that come to us. Basically because you have to understand that at the hospitals, they had to defer a lot of other operations to give focus on COVID. So we do have the amount of waste that come to us about the same, but it's mainly waste coming from the COVID side. So a lot of operation has been deferred and to later stage. So that's why the volume of waste actually doesn't change much. Did I answer all the long questions? So
yeah, I think you answered most of the issues. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you very much. What's happening in Mongolia regarding COVID-19 waste generated?
Mongolia, only one company has a license to handle and treat medical waste, and after COVID-19, we haven't had any data how much medical waste related to pandemic is generated from Mongolia, and that one licensed company only treat that medical waste, and disposable mask and disposable waste is treated by that company, and there is no any data how much waste is generated over the times.
Okay.
The time of pandemic.
Okay. Thank you very much. And in Singapore, Matt?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously there was a significant increase in the amount of biohazardous waste throughout the pandemic period this year. There are 5 or 6 principal facilities licensed already to process biohazardous or medical waste in Singapore, and so they obviously were deluged, but coped with largely with the volume. There were a couple of other incinerators that traditionally didn't process a lot of biohazardous material that took some additional to take up some of the slack. And all of these businesses maintained their essential services scope throughout the pandemic, so remained open and continued obviously to service what was an increasing demand. There was obviously a lot of impact from COVID across the economy. So some sectors of the economy sped up and generated more waste. Some businesses are doing okay. Pharmaceutical and electronics are both going strong in Singapore. Other businesses are going slow. So generally there was a cooling off in some of the waste generated, like in aeronautics, like I mentioned before. So there's not just a change in biohazardous, but a change in the market generally. Perhaps the most significant impact to Singapore as economy in general, and not just in the hazardous waste sector, is that there are a significant number of foreign workers working within Singapore, either coming to stay in dormitories in Singapore or crossing the border regularly from Malaysia before the borders were closed due to COVID. And so this most significant impact on the economy generally, and particularly on waste management, was the restriction of available human resources, because the dormitories were closed down during the pandemic because there were significant cases in the dormitories and the border was closed. So a large proportion of the available human resources normally available within the industry were no longer available. And so the constraint on operations was not waste volume, but the manpower to continue working. That's generally getting better now. The volumes of biohazardous waste have cooled off a little from the peak earlier in the pandemic. We'll just have to see how that goes. Singapore is well under control at the moment, touch wood, but depends on how things go in the longer term. Obviously, in other places, some of the second wave or third wave is in effect. And we'll have to see. Singapore is a transit nation. There's a lot of traffic traditionally through Singapore. So the future for what happens in Singapore won't just be about Singapore managing the situation. I think one of the biggest impacts that's interesting for Singapore out of this is a much more heightened sense of urgency for business continuity across all industries. So both the issues of the pandemic itself, the issues of the restriction on manpower, the availability of facilities to provide services specifically for hazardous waste, mean that it's front of mind for most of the procurers of services that they need some level of business continuity. And many of the larger players in Singapore would like to have a single contractor or a lead contractor to manage this for them, and then subcontract services to other players if there's additional capacity required, but to manage the flow for them, which is currently not supported by NEA in the regulations. If the transport and collection and treatment is being done by a company, then they have a contract, and there's no subcontracting between facilities, which we'll need to work on with NEA to see if we can come up with a solution that adequately covers the business continuity risks that the larger generators are looking to address. So, it's certainly presented a lot of challenges.
Okay, crystal clear also. So we have, I think, passed through all the prepared question, and we have a lot of questions on the chat, and we will try to answer some of the questions. And if I try to look at them, one of the first question we've seen at the beginning, because we will try to take also the order of the questions, is question for you all. I don't know if you can answer it, but it's probably to have your viewpoint on that. The question is, Indonesia's Ministry of Environment recently relaxed hazardous waste regulation. Fly ash from coal power plants and incinerators are not classified now and require no special disposal treatment. This is in the interest of lowering OPEX from power plants and new waste-to-energy operators. Is this not scandalous? So this is a little bit a controversial question, but if some of you want to answer that one, yes, just take the floor or say, yeah, I want to answer. You're not really, it's not your region, of course. Yes, you can.
Maybe I can share what we do in Malaysia. Actually, in Malaysia, both fly ash and bottom ash are controlled as scheduled waste, but there are provisions where they can apply for special waste management, taking into consideration the volume of waste they generate. So the authority can give them special approval, but they still need to manage it in a proper manner. Not that it goes without control at all. And some of the bottom ash are being used, are being reused for some purpose, which actually is being done under very strict conditions prescribed by the authority. So they are regulated, but in a slightly different way.
Okay, it's clear. Is there any other point of view on this question? I don't know. I would say that on my point of view and regarding the regulation we have in Europe in general, I would say those kind of fly ashes from incineration are all considered as hazardous waste. For bottom ashes, it could be different, and some of them are recycled, as you say, Shiasma, depending on the classification and on the content of hazardous substances in it. And but regarding fly ashes from coal power plant, it depends. Some of them are reused or mainly for the production of cement. Or mixed with clinker in order to make of some cement with it, but also it depends. You can have some radioactivity also in this kind of fly ash, depending on the origin of the coal. So yeah, there are different possibilities, I would say.
Yeah, we do have co-processing for cement plant regarding scheduled waste, but again, it's done in a very controlled manner. Because sure. the regulation, the original is that it is in the schedule, and they got to be regulated in a way.
Okay, thank you very much. There is one question for Bulgarian, specifically for Mongolia, which is, so this is from someone from Hungary who is working with someone, a Mongolian colleague, and they are working on a comparative analysis regarding the existing landfill practices between the two countries, so Hungary on one side and Mongolia in another side. And the question is, are hazardous waste can be dumped in landfill in Mongolia? If not, what kind of other waste processes and handling is existing for specialized hazardous waste packaging material? And can you tell me some example regarding other hazardous waste like pharmaceutical waste that exist for the treatment in Mongolia?
Okay.
So it's for you again.
Thank you. Thank you. In this year, in capital city of Ulaanbaatar, we have done 2 landfill experiences in 2 waste points.
Mhm. It's for hazardous waste. It's landfill for hazardous waste. This is what you.
Yeah, by landfill technology techniques.
Okay.
Until that operation will be done until 2023.
Okay.
And last year estimation, our 24% of waste is recycled in by industries in city, capital city, and 8% of waste recycling materials transported from countrysides to Ulaanbaatar, capital city.
Okay, so everything is concentrated to Ulaanbaatar, and the main plant is in Ulaanbaatar for that. This is what you say.
Yeah.
Okay.
All the recycling industries are centered in Ulaanbaatar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Another question is, recycling better comes at the additional cost. Yes, for sure. Do you think that EPR scheme will make a good case? And if yes, what is the status quo globally? So the question is much more turning around the role of EPR scheme in better recycling. So do you have some hints on that specific question, some of you?
Yeah, I can speak on that one, I suppose. So here in Singapore, the topic of EPR is quite present, quite popular. So there is an EPR scheme being rolled out for electronics and related waste. So that covers everything from white goods and traditional electronics in the home through to solar panels and a whole range of different types of related electronic wastes. And obviously there's a hazardous waste management component to that, and a drive towards recycling where possible. Similarly, there's an EPR in development, which will be on a slightly later timeline for plastics. And I think the biggest issue when it comes to trying to balance these issues of risk and hazard, and then trying to push for recycling is around where recycling is not driven by the waste arising. Recycling is driven by the demand for whatever the commodity is that's embodied in the waste. So you need to be able to match the demand with whatever waste is around. And in Singapore's particular example, the problem that Singapore faces with much of this is that the types of advanced manufacturing that occur in Singapore don't have the demand for the raw commodities. Making bottles and making textiles out of plastics does not occur here in Singapore. So the demand for plastics, or the demand for the metals that are in electronics, or the silicon that's in solar panels, may not be here. There is some, but not in high volume. So that's always an issue, and then that's where it's the cross-border management of these issues comes into play, and the balance of trying to move the hazardous waste, but also trying to achieve resource recovery by working with neighbouring countries, which is a challenge in this part of the world. It's something that happens, within Europe, but across multiple countries. But it doesn't happen a lot yet in these markets, but it will increasingly become something that will need to happen in Singapore and Malaysia and neighbouring countries as we work together on some of these problems.
Okay, great. Is there something specific in Malaysia or in Mongolia regarding EPR scheme and hazardous waste and how to recycle better? Do you have something to say about that or not? No?
I think it's very much under study for Malaysia. No? We haven't got any specific regulation as yet. It's a lot of work in progress, and in particular the electronic waste being looked at on that.
Okay, very good. So you know that in France we are the champions of the EPR scheme. We are more than 20 of them. It's very crazy, but yes, we live with that. Another question, I think you already answered a little bit, Matt, it's for you. Can Singapore import waste for treatment?
As a general rule, no. The infrastructure in Singapore is dedicated to Singapore's waste and predominantly driven by the concerns I talked about, particularly the limited landfill for residues. So the government does not want to introduce wastes that generate a residue that will take up space in the limited landfill space that we have. So it's not about technical capability, it's just about capacity to handle the residues in the end. So there may be very specific cases, you know, with a ship that comes to the shipyard for some sort of overhaul, and then there's something on board the ship that needs to be treated in Singapore, but generally, no, there's no import of waste.
Okay. The next question was for Hazma, but she also answered a little bit, I think. Does integrated facility in Malaysia include medical waste?
Yes, I think I've answered just now. The integrated facility that we have include a facility to treat medical waste. On top of that, there are other facilities that are licensed specifically just to treat the medical waste, the clinical waste. I think we have about 4 or 5 facilities besides Quality Alam.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is for all of you, and it's an interesting one. So should the surgical mask that we use daily during the COVID-19 epidemic be treated as hazardous waste, as it may have infectious properties and may be considered as clinical waste? And what is your opinion on that?
In Malaysia, we have definitions for clinical waste, and I think this is where we have to draw a line between what we can manage and what we should manage, because I don't think all the masks are contaminated. Because it's you know, if we make that requirement that it need to be handled as a hazardous waste, then we're going to end up with a lot of volumes to handle, and also it's going to be an enforcement issue as well on how we can make that happen. So we got to balance of you know, on the impact as well as what is practical that we can do.
Yes, very, very realistic, I think. In Singapore, do you have a...
Yeah, I mean, in broad concept, the answer is the same. It's very difficult to collect from every household and every business every day if it was hazardous waste. There's just not the collection infrastructure in place to make that practical. And at the same time, there's a very robust general waste collection system, which in Singapore's case, everything goes to a waste to energy plant. And so it is getting incinerated. It's a different temperature profile and a different mix of wastes, but it is being treated appropriately at the point of treatment. And everything is collected daily in that general waste collection generally. So it's moved away from the population quickly and disposed of quickly. There would not be an alternative that could be that robust.
Okay. I think that in Mongolia, as you said before, the question of COVID-19 was not really predominant. So I don't know if you have something to say specifically on the classification of those personal equipment like mask, and is there any specific classification in Mongolia? Do you have something to say? Yeah. Or is it,
as I mentioned before, we have one licensed company handle and treated medical waste, and surgical masks are everywhere. We haven't any regulations and disposal regulations, and we dispose our surgical masks to a regular bin. Yeah, that's the problem.
It's clear. Thank you very much. The next question is a little bit more tricky, and there are two questions on this kind of waste. Is waste from radioactive material considered as just hazardous or more than that? Is it generally treated differently from hazardous waste, from other hazardous waste? If so, how? I will give part of an answer, I think. So there is a big separation between hazardous waste and radioactive waste. They are not the same, and they are treated completely differently. So it's not the same kind of treatment. It's not the same kind of processes and methodology for handling those kind of waste because of the radioactivity risks. So in general, radioactive waste material is not considered as a hazardous waste, but and they are specifically treated. So you can have thermal treatment, you can have disposal like sort of landfilling for this kind of radioactive waste, but it's very dedicated for this kind of waste. So I don't know if some of you guys have something to say specifically on this kind of hazardous or radioactive waste and how it is handled in your country.
In Singapore, I mean, we don't have a lot of high-level radioactive waste. There's obviously a little bit from medical treatment and that sort of thing, but there's no high volumes because we don't have nuclear reactors or whatever. But we do have to deal with naturally occurring radioactive material that comes from oil processing and whatever else. So there's a little bit of consideration there, but it is generally radioactive waste is completely excluded from the traditional hazardous waste network of facilities. And if we did eventually have some high radioactive waste of any quantity, it would probably be something that would be exported.
Okay.
In Malaysia, the radioactive waste actually are regulated under different legislation, and it's not with the scheduled waste regulation unless the atomic agency has cleared it from them being radioactive. Then only you fall under scheduled waste.
Okay. Okay. Is it an issue in Mongolia, this kind of radioactive waste?
Please say again the question.
The question was about how you consider a radioactive material. Is it considered as a hazardous waste, if it's a waste, or is it something different? And then is it treated differently?
In our country, radioactive materials and regular waste are distinctive, and we try to separate them. For example, radioactive materials like waste and batteries are collected separately through chain stores.
Okay. Okay, thank you. The next question is also on radioactive waste, and I'm not sure that we will be able to answer this question. It's much more remark, I think. It's regarding what's happened in Japan on Fukushima, and the question is, I would like to ask your opinion regarding the issue of Japan that puts off decision to release treated Fukushima water into sea. So is there anyone who want to give his opinion on that? And I don't know. No. Yeah, I think it's difficult to answer this and go above a political decision on this kind of water water release. I go through the different questions. I think that so yes, a question regarding microplastic. Would microplastic be addressed as a hazardous waste somehow, as far as they also harm and cause a chronic syndrome to the creatures, or yes, all living bodies? Do you have already something in the legislation regarding microplastic and how to deal with this kind of waste or pollutant released in water, mainly?
It's definitely a growing area, or a developing area for regulation, and obviously the Basel Convention is trying to address some of the plastics as well, which is then being monitored by each of the countries. So here in Singapore, following similar lines to what's happening in the Basel Convention, there are different processes or rules depending on whether the waste falls into hazardous. You know, if it's packaging in the form of a bottle, it's not yet a microplastic, and it's something that flows in the non-hazardous stream. And then there are certain concerns for other types of plastic depending on where they're generated. As far as I'm aware, in Singapore, there's no specific legislation yet on the use of microplastics. You know, at least a few years ago, I'm not sure whether they still are. There was quite a few in little beads in certain products for certain purposes, and that will probably come with time on what can and can't be done.
Okay, there is something specific on that for Malaysia or Singapore or
Malaysia. I think the authority are following the issue closely and stand to be guided by the international community on what's the best way to manage it.
Okay, and in Mongolia, is there something specific regarding microplastic at the moment?
There is no regulations on microplastics.
Okay, okay, but we know that it's really a hot topic which is growing up everywhere, and for sure this is one of the concern we have, all of us, and it's not only a question for hazardous waste treatment, but for waste treatment in general, and for recycling, and for the quality of water bodies, and what's happened in marine littering in general. So I think we have to stop here for the questions because we are close to the end. I will just ask each of you a last word to conclude this webinar that was very fruitful in my opinion. So I will start with Sheikh Asma. What is your last word?
Okay, I think here we all must understand the impact of the scheduled waste, the hazardous waste, if it's not properly managed. Of course, managing scheduled waste in the right manner is not cheap, but that that should not be a reason for people to dump the scheduled waste into the river or to do it illegally. Actually, for us like Quality Alam, we are managing it properly. Every technology has got costs that come to it in making sure that it's done properly. So the industrials should factor all this cost of managing their waste into their process costs, and that should be part of the whole financial assessment that they need to do. I think there was recently quite an issue. People are saying that because of the cost to manage scheduled waste is expensive, therefore people are dumping into the river. I think that is definitely not the way of doing it. And I would like to say here that Quality Alam and Sembaro, we are actually doing it properly. And there are also other illegal operators that are dumping it into the river because they want to cut costs, and that is definitely not what we want to see. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Fully agree with you. I endorse it totally. And for Mongolia, last words.
Thank you for inviting us to participate in these discussions, and because the hazardous waste is also serious problem in all over the world. And the mid of 2010, hazardous waste and chemical substances are imported into our country very hugely, very increased because of mine industries, mine exploration, etc. So we need to also our regulations and laws are already effective, but we need to expand our facilities and need to reproduce and recycle other hazardous waste. Only few types of hazardous waste are recycled in our country, so we need to expand and encourage, increase our equipment, facilities and capabilities.
Yeah, for sure. So more infrastructures are needed in Mongolia. And the last word for Singapore.
So thanks everyone for joining us today. A lot of people came on board, and appreciate the opportunity to get involved on this discussion. I think the general summary from Singapore is that we're definitely moving away from the industry needing to be an end-of-pipe solution or an end-of-life solution, and the circular economy is driving the future initiatives in Singapore, and we need to make sure that we're maximising the recovery of whatever is extractable from the waste, whether it is resource or whether it is cogeneration to produce energy, whether it's electricity or heat, steam. We need to assess all those opportunities to make sure that that we're sustainable for the future.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you. I think that we all have a lot to do in the future on the safe management of hazardous waste. I hope it was a fruitful webinar for all of you. It was a pleasure for me to be there. Thank you to our three speakers and to share their view on what's happened in their country. And thank you for ISWA to having organized this meeting with the national members of Malaysia and Singapore. Thank you very much. Bye to all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.